The day I found the smoking gun buried in a stack of HOA documents was the day I realized my neighborhood had been operating under a lie for nearly a decade. I bought my house in Clearwater, Florida 3 years ago, a modest 3-bedroom ranch in the Palmetto Springs subdivision. The neighborhood was decent enough, with well-maintained lawns and friendly neighbors who waved when you drove past. The HOA fees were reasonable at $150 a month, and I figured it was worth it for the community pool and the landscaping service that kept our entrance looking pristine. What I didn't know was that I'd been paying into what amounted to a financial black hole, managed by a woman who treated our community like her personal fiefdom. Her name was Patricia Kensington, though everyone called her Patty behind her back. She was 52 years old with that distinctive haircut that screamed entitlement, the kind where the back is short and the front swoops down at severe angles. She drove a white Lexus SUV and wore designer sunglasses even on cloudy days. Patty had been the HOA president for 9 years, and she ran the board like a dictatorship. The other board members were her friends from her book club, and they rubber-stamped every decision she made without question. My problems with the HOA started small. I got a violation notice because my garbage cans were visible from the street on a Thursday afternoon. Collection day was Friday morning, and I'd put them out after getting home from work. The fine was $50. When I showed up to the next board meeting to contest it, Patty sat at the head of the table in the community center with her arms crossed, looking at me like I just tracked mud across her Persian rug. The rules clearly state that garbage cans can only be placed at the curb after 6 p.m. the evening before collection, she said, tapping a manicured nail on the bylaw document in front of her. I put them out at 6:15, I replied, keeping my voice even. I have a timestamp on my doorbell camera if you need proof. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The neighbor who reported it said it was 5:45. Are you calling them a liar? I'm saying I have video evidence. We'll take that under advisement, she said, which I quickly learned was Patty speak for we're going to do whatever we want anyway. The fine stood. I paid it because fighting it further would have cost me more in time and aggravation than $50 was worth. But it stuck in my craw. Over the next few months, I noticed Patty seemed to have it out for certain homeowners. My next-door neighbor, Marcus, got cited for having the wrong shade of white on his mailbox post. The approved color was Dover white, and apparently his was alabaster. The fine was $100, old Mrs. Chen down the street got hit with a $200 fine because her lawn guy came on a Saturday, and the bylaws said no lawn maintenance on weekends. The thing was, Mrs. Chen's lawn guy had been coming on Saturdays for 5 years without issue. It only became a problem after she'd voiced concerns at a board meeting about the community pool being closed for repairs for 3 months straight. I started paying closer attention after that. The pool thing was suspicious. 3 months of repairs for what Patty claimed was a pump issue, and some tile replacement seemed excessive. When the pool finally reopened, it looked exactly the same as it had before. I'd asked around, and nobody had seen any workers there. No trucks, no equipment, nothing. Just a locked gate and a sign that said, "Closed for repairs." That's when I decided to start digging into the HOA's finances. As a homeowner in the association, I had a legal right to review the financial records. Florida Statute 720.303 is pretty clear about this. Any homeowner can inspect the official records of the association, and the HOA has to make them available within 10 business days of a written request. I sent my request via certified mail on a Monday morning. Patty called me that evening. I was making dinner when my phone rang, and her voice came through with that fake sweetness that Southern women weaponize so effectively. "Hi there, this is Patty Kensington from the HOA board." I got your little request today. Great, I said, stirring pasta sauce. When can I come by to review the records? Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Can I ask why you're interested in the financial records? Is there a specific concern you have? I turned off the burner and leaned against my kitchen counter. I don't need to provide a reason. The statute is clear that any homeowner can review the records. There was a pause. Of course, I just like to know what my neighbors are thinking. We're all one big community here. I'll be happy to discuss my thoughts after I've reviewed the records, so when can I pick them up? Another pause, longer this time. Our bookkeeper is actually out of town right now. She won't be back for 2 weeks. Can you wait until then? The statute says 10 business days, Patty. Yes, but she's the only one with access to all the files. They're not here at the community center. She keeps them at her home office. I didn't believe that for a second, but I also knew that pushing too hard too fast would just make them circle the wagons. Fine, 2 weeks. I'll follow up on the 15th. Wonderful, have a great evening. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in my kitchen, phone in hand, and realized I'd just poked a bear. A bear with a bad haircut and a Lexus, but a bear nonetheless. The 15th came and went with no word from Patty. I sent another certified letter on the 16th, this time noting that they were now in violation of state law. 3 days later, I got a call from a man who identified himself as Richard Stromberg, the HOA's attorney. Mr. Caldwell, I'm calling regarding your records request. The board wants to cooperate fully, but there seems to be some confusion about what records you're entitled to see. I sat down at my home office desk and pulled up the Florida statute on my computer screen. Section 720.303 is pretty clear. I'm entitled to review all official records of the association. That includes financial records, contracts, budgets, audits, and meeting minutes for the past 7 years. Yes, but there are privacy concerns. We can't just hand over documents that might contain personal information about other homeowners. I'm not asking for personal information. I'm asking for financial records showing how the HOA is spending our money. Income, expenses, reserve accounts, that sort of thing. Stromberg cleared his throat. The board is willing to provide summarized financial statements. Would that satisfy your request? No, I want to see the actual records, bank statements, invoices, receipts. That's highly irregular. It's actually completely regular. It's what the law requires. We went back and forth for another 10 minutes before he finally said the board would discuss my request and get back to me. I hung up knowing they were stonewalling. The question was why. I started doing more research into HOA law and found out about something called Form 990. Homeowner associations that qualify as tax-exempt organizations under Section 501(c)(4) of the Internal Revenue Code have to file this form annually with the IRS. It's a public document that shows income, expenses, and how the organization is operating. I went to the IRS website and searched for Palmetto Springs Homeowners Association. Nothing came up. I tried different variations of the name. Still nothing. I expanded my search to include all 501(c)(4) organizations in Clearwater, Florida, and scrolled through the results. Our HOA wasn't there. That was odd, but not necessarily damning. Maybe they weren't registered as a 501(c)(4). Some HOAs operate as Florida not-for-profit corporations without seeking federal tax-exempt status. I pulled up the Florida Division of Corporations website and looked up our HOA there. The entity existed, and it was registered as a not-for-profit corporation. But when I looked at the details, I noticed something interesting. The annual reports hadn't been filed in 3 years. This was getting weird. I printed out everything I could find and spread it across my dining room table. I had the articles of incorporation from when the HOA was formed back in 1998. I had the bylaws, which I'd received when I bought my house. I had 2 years of budgets that had been distributed at annual meetings, though they were vague summary documents that didn't show much detail, and I had a whole lot of questions. My phone rang. It was Marcus from next door. "Hey man, are you home? I need to talk to you about something." "Yeah, come on over." Marcus showed up 5 minutes later looking agitated. He was a systems engineer for a tech company and worked from home most days. He was around my age, mid-30s, and we'd become friends over the shared experience of dealing with HOA nonsense. "I just got a call from Patty," he said, standing in my entryway. "She told me that you were causing trouble for the board and that I should talk to you about being a better neighbor." I actually laughed. She said that? Dude, she went on this whole rant about how the board works hard as volunteers and they don't need people questioning every little thing they do. She said you were harassing them with frivolous records requests. "Come look at this." I led him to my dining room and showed him what I'd found. The HOA hasn't filed annual reports with the state in 3 years. They don't show up in the IRS database for tax-exempt organizations, and they're refusing to let me see detailed financial records. Marcus picked up one of the budget summaries. "What do you think is going on?" "I don't know yet, but something isn't right. We pay $1,800 a year in HOA fees. There are 212 houses in this subdivision. That's over $380,000 a year. Where's it all going?" He let out a low whistle. "Holy crap, I never did the math." "Right. So we should have excellent amenities, healthy reserve funds, and transparent accounting. Instead, we have a pool that's constantly broken, landscaping that's just okay, and a board that won't show me the books. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to keep pushing." "I've got the law on my side." Marcus nodded slowly. "Be careful, man. Patty's connected. Her husband is a city councilman." "I know, but that doesn't put them above the law." After Marcus left, I sat down and drafted a formal demand letter. I'd worked as a project manager for a construction company for 12 years, and I'd learned how to write clear, professional correspondence that didn't leave wiggle room. I cited the specific Florida statute, noted the dates of my previous requests, and gave them 5 business days to comply or I'd be filing a complaint with the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, which has oversight of HOA disputes. I sent the letter via certified mail, email, and regular mail. I wanted a paper trail that would hold up if this went legal. 3 days later, I came home from work to find a violation notice on my door. My house number plaque was apparently the wrong font. Fine, $150. I took a picture of my house number, then walked up and down my street taking pictures of every other house number. At least 30 houses had the exact same style as mine. Some had different styles altogether. I documented everything. The next morning, I received an email from Richard Stromberg informing me that the board had decided to make the financial records available for inspection. However, I could only review them at the community center, during business hours with a board member present, and I couldn't make copies or take photos. I could take handwritten notes only. It was a power play, but it was also compliance, sort of. I responded that I would be there Saturday morning at 10 a.m. When Saturday rolled around, I showed up at the community center with 3 legal pads and a handful of pens. Patty was waiting for me, along with another board member, a woman named Susan who I'd seen at meetings but never really talked to. They'd set up a single folding table in the middle of the room with a stack of bankers' boxes on it. "These are all the financial records for the past 7 years, Patty said, gesturing to the boxes like she was presenting a prize on a game show. "You can sit here and review them. Susan will be staying to supervise." I pulled out a chair and opened the first box. It was a mess. Receipts were mixed with bank statements, which were mixed with random invoices. Nothing was organized by date or category. It looked like someone had just thrown papers into boxes with no filing system whatsoever. "These aren't organized," I said. Patty shrugged. "That's how our bookkeeper keeps them. If you need help finding something specific, just ask Susan." She left, her heels clicking on the tile floor. Susan sat in a chair by the wall, scrolling through her phone. I got to work. The first thing I noticed was that the bank statements were from 3 different banks. That seemed odd. Most organizations keep their accounts at one institution for simplicity. I started with the oldest statements and began making notes. The HOA's main operating account showed regular deposits of dues from homeowners, which matched what I expected. But the expenses were weird. There were regular checks written to something called Palmetto Property Management Services, for amounts ranging from $2,000 to $5,000, usually twice a month. "Susan, what's Palmetto Property Management Services?" I asked. She looked up from her phone. I think that's the company that manages the common areas." I thought the HOA board managed everything directly. Patty would know better than me. I just help with the annual meeting. I made a note to research Palmetto Property Management Services. Over the next 4 hours, I went through box after box, filling up page after page with notes. The deeper I dug, the weirder things got. There were massive cash withdrawals every few months, sometimes $10,000 at a time, with no documentation of what the cash was used for. There were credit card statements showing charges at places like Home Goods, Michael's Craft Store, and a bunch of restaurants. There were checks written to individuals with just last names in the memo line, no invoices or contracts to explain what they were for. And then, I found something that made my blood run cold. In a box marked 2018 to 2019, there was a letter from the IRS. It was dated October 2019 and addressed to the Palmetto Springs Homeowners Association. I read it twice to make sure I understood what I was looking at. The IRS was notifying the HOA that their tax-exempt status under Section 501(c)(4) had been automatically revoked because they'd failed to file Form 990 for 3 consecutive years. The letter explained that the revocation was effective as of the date they were originally required to file, which was May 2017. It went on to say that the organization could reapply for tax-exempt status, but they'd need to go through the full application process again. I looked at the date again. October 2019. This letter was from over 6 years ago. I flipped through more documents and found the HOA's original IRS determination letter from 2001, granting them 501(c)(4) status. But there was nothing after the 2019 revocation letter. No correspondence about reapplying, no new determination letter, nothing. "Susan, can I get copies of these?" I held up the IRS letters. Patty said no copies. "These are public documents. The IRS determination letters are supposed to be available to any member of the public who requests them." Susan looked uncomfortable. "I don't know, I should call Patty." "Go ahead." She stepped outside to make the call. I used the time to photograph the letters with my phone, doing it quickly and quietly. I wasn't going to leave without evidence of what I'd found. Susan came back looking even more uncomfortable. "Patty says absolutely no copies, no exceptions." "Fine." I went back to my notes, but I'd already gotten what I needed. I spent another hour documenting other suspicious expenses, then thanked Susan and left. I spent the rest of the weekend researching and cross-referencing what I'd found. Palmetto Property Management Services turned out to be registered to an address in Tampa. When I looked up the business on the Florida Division of Corporations website, the registered agent was listed as Patricia J. Kensington. Patty was writing checks to herself from the HOA account. I dug deeper into the IRS revocation issue. When a tax-exempt organization loses its status, it becomes a taxable entity. That means any income it receives is subject to corporate income tax. Our HOA had been collecting over $380,000 a year in dues for the past 6 years since the revocation. And if they hadn't filed tax returns, they potentially owed the IRS a massive amount of money. More importantly, they'd been operating as if they were still tax-exempt, which meant they'd been lying to the membership. On Monday morning, I called the IRS Taxpayer Advocate Service and spoke to a representative. I explained the situation and asked what I should do. She told me that if I had evidence of a tax-exempt organization operating without valid status, I could file Form 13,909, which is a complaint form for reporting tax-exempt organizations suspected of wrongdoing. I spent that evening filling out the form. I detailed everything I'd found: the revocation letter, the lack of any subsequent filings, the fact that the HOA had continued collecting dues and operating as if they were still tax-exempt, and the self-dealing with Palmetto Property Management Services. I attached copies of the IRS letters I'd photographed, along with a summary of the financial irregularities I'd documented. I submitted the form electronically on Tuesday morning. Then I did something else. I filed a formal complaint with the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, Division of Condominiums, Timeshares, and Mobile Homes. Even though we were an HOA and not a condo association, they still had jurisdiction over certain HOA disputes, particularly those involving financial mismanagement. And because I was feeling thorough, I also filed a complaint with the Florida Attorney General's Office, Economic Crimes Division. If Patty had been embezzling HOA funds through her fake management company, that was a criminal matter. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. I wanted to see what would happen. The response came faster than I expected. 2 weeks after I submitted the IRS complaint, I got a call from a special agent with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Her name was Agent Torres, and she wanted to meet with me in person. We met at a coffee shop in Tampa, about 20 miles from my house. Agent Torres was a serious woman in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a bun. She had a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of every federal agent I'd ever seen in movies, except she was real and sitting across from me with a case file. "Mr. Caldwell, thank you for meeting with me. I've reviewed your complaint and the supporting documentation. I need to ask you some questions." "Of course. How did you obtain these IRS letters?" "The ones showing the revocation of tax-exempt status. I made a formal request under Florida statute to inspect the HOA's financial records. Those letters were in the records they provided." "Were you authorized to photograph them?" "They're public documents. IRS determination letters and revocation notices for 501(c)(4) organizations are supposed to be publicly available." She made a note. "Tell me about Palmetto Property Management Services." I explained what I'd found, how the checks were written regularly to a company that was registered to Patty Kensington, and how there was no legitimate contract or scope of work documented anywhere in the files. "How much total would you estimate was paid to this company?" I pulled out my notepad. I'd been anticipating this question. "Based on the records I reviewed, approximately $378,000 over 6 years. Agent Torres's eyebrow went up slightly. "That's specific. I'm good with numbers." "It's part of my job." "What do you do?" "Project manager for a construction company. I track budgets and expenses all day," she nodded. "Did you find evidence of any other financial irregularities?" I told her about the cash withdrawals, the credit card charges, the lack of proper documentation for expenses. I showed her my notes, which I'd organized by date and category. She took pictures of several pages with her phone. "Mr. Caldwell, I need to ask you something directly. Do you have any personal grudge against Patricia Kensington or the HOA board? I think they're running the HOA poorly, and I think Patty has been stealing from the homeowners. But my complaint isn't personal, it's about the law. They lost their tax-exempt status and continued operating as if nothing changed. That's tax fraud, isn't it? Potentially, yes. If they've been filing tax returns claiming exemption they no longer have, or if they haven't been filing returns at all, that's a serious issue." She closed her notebook. "I'm going to need you to keep this conversation confidential. Don't discuss this investigation with anyone, including the HOA board. What happens now? We investigate, that's all I can tell you." We shook hands and I drove home feeling like I'd just set something huge in motion. I wasn't wrong. 3 weeks later, I was at work when Marcus called me, his voice high and excited. "Dude, you need to come home. There are IRS agents at the community center, like a lot of them." I told my boss I had an emergency and drove home. Sure enough, there were 3 black SUVs parked in front of the community center, along with a Clearwater Police Department cruiser. I parked down the street and watched from a distance. Agents in windbreakers with IRS written on the back were carrying boxes out of the building. Patty was standing by her Lexus, talking to a man in a suit. Even from 50 yards away, I could see she looked devastated. The raid lasted for about 3 hours. They took boxes and boxes of documents, along with what looked like a computer. Patty left in her car after the agents did, and she looked like she'd been crying. The neighborhood was buzzing that evening. My phone kept ringing with calls from neighbors asking if I knew what was happening. I played dumb. I said I'd heard there was some kind of investigation but didn't know the details. 2 days later, every homeowner in the subdivision received a certified letter from Richard Stromberg, the HOA attorney. It was a single page that said the HOA board was temporarily suspending all activities pending an investigation by federal and state authorities. It advised homeowners to continue paying their dues into the HOA account, but noted that no enforcement actions would be taken for any violations during the suspension period. It was signed by all 5 board members. The next week, Patty resigned from the board. The resignation letter was terse and gave no explanation. Susan and the other 3 board members resigned the following day. The HOA was effectively leaderless. An emergency meeting was called for the following Saturday. Over 100 homeowners showed up at the community center, which was way more than usually attended meetings. A lawyer named David Pritchard introduced himself as special counsel appointed by the remaining members to manage the transition. He stood at the front of the room and delivered news that hit like a bomb. "I'm going to be direct with you because you all deserve to know what's happening. The IRS has revoked the HOA's tax-exempt status, effective retroactively to 2017. This happened in 2019, but the previous board did not inform the membership or take corrective action. As a result, the HOA has been operating as a taxable entity for the past 6 years, without filing required tax returns. The IRS has assessed penalties and interest that, as of today, amount to approximately $213,000. The room erupted. People were shouting questions, expressing outrage, demanding answers. Pritchard held up his hands for quiet. "There's more." The IRS and the Florida Attorney General's office are investigating allegations of financial mismanagement and possible embezzlement. I cannot discuss the details of an ongoing criminal investigation, but I can tell you that the previous board president, Patricia Kensington, is the primary focus of that investigation. "Who found all this out?" Someone shouted from the back. Pritchard looked uncomfortable. A homeowner filed a complaint with the IRS after conducting a review of the HOA's financial records. That complaint triggered the investigation. Every head in the room turned, people looking around to see who it might be. I kept my face neutral and didn't react. What happens now? Someone else asked. We need to elect an interim board immediately. We need to hire a forensic accountant to conduct a complete audit of the past 7 years of finances. We need to cooperate fully with the federal and state investigations. And we need to determine if we want to reapply for tax-exempt status or restructure the HOA entirely. None of this will be cheap or quick. Over the next 2 hours, we elected a new interim board. Marcus was elected as president, which I thought was fitting. A retired CPA named George took over as treasurer. 3 other level-headed homeowners filled out the remaining positions. I was asked to serve but declined. I'd done my part, and I didn't want to be in the spotlight. The forensic audit took 3 months and cost the HOA $42,000. The results were damning. Patty had embezzled approximately $415,000 over 8 years through the fake management company, inflated invoices, and direct theft via unauthorized credit card charges and cash withdrawals. The cash had been used for everything from home renovations to shopping sprees to family vacations. She'd been treating the HOA account like her personal piggy bank. The report was turned over to the Florida Attorney General's office and the IRS. Criminal charges followed quickly. Patricia Kensington was arrested on a Tuesday morning in July. I was at work when Marcus texted me the news. She was charged with grand theft, embezzlement, tax fraud, and filing false documents. Her husband, the city councilman, resigned his position 2 days later. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly our quiet little subdivision was all over the Tampa Bay area news stations. I got a call from Agent Torres a week after Patty's arrest. Mr. Caldwell, I wanted to thank you personally. Your complaint gave us the foundation we needed to build a solid case. Without your documentation and persistence, this might have gone on for years. I just wanted to see the books, I said. I never expected it to be this bad. That's how it often works. One person asks the right questions and everything unravels. You should be proud of what you did. What's going to happen to her? She's facing significant prison time. The amount of money involved, combined with the tax fraud and the duration of the scheme, makes this a serious felony case. I'd expect at least 5 to 10 years if she's convicted, which I'm confident she will be. Patty ended up taking a plea deal in October. She pled guilty to all charges in exchange for a recommended sentence of 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, though her assets were already being liquidated to cover the debt. Her house went up for sale, along with the Lexus and pretty much everything else she owned. Even with all that, the HOA would only recover about $200,000 of what she'd stolen. The IRS penalty was another problem. The new board negotiated a payment plan, but it meant the HOA had to do a special assessment. Every homeowner had to pay an additional $700 to cover the debt. People were angry, but most understood it wasn't the current board's fault. A few homeowners actually sued Patty directly in civil court and got judgments, though collecting on them would be nearly impossible given her financial situation. The HOA decided not to reapply for 501(c)(4) status. George, the new treasurer, explained at a meeting that the requirements and oversight were more trouble than they were worth for an organization our size. Instead, we restructured as a simple not-for-profit corporation and committed to transparent financial management. Bank statements were now posted online every month. We hired an independent accounting firm to manage the books and conduct annual audits. And we implemented term limits for board members so no one person could control the organization for years on end. The whole experience changed our neighborhood in unexpected ways. People became more engaged. Meeting attendance went from a handful of homeowners to 50 or 60 regularly. Committees were formed to handle different aspects of community management. The pool got properly repaired, with multiple bids and transparent selection of contractors. Landscaping improved because we actually put out RFPs and hired based on value rather than whoever Patty's friend was. I got thanked a lot in the months that followed. People would stop me at the mailbox or when I was mowing my lawn to shake my hand and tell me I'd done a good thing. It was awkward at first because I never set out to be a hero. I just wanted to know where my money was going. Marcus and I were sitting on my back patio one evening in late November, drinking beer and watching the sun set. He'd done a good job as interim president, and the neighborhood had voted to keep him on for a full term. "You know what's crazy?" he said. "If you just paid that garbage can fine and never asked any questions, Patty would still be stealing from us." "Probably," I agreed, "but someone would have figured it out eventually." "I don't know, man. She got away with it for 8 years. How much longer could she have kept going?" I thought about that. Until someone with construction management experience and a stubborn streak moved in and started asking uncomfortable questions. He laughed. "Exactly. You're like the world's most boring superhero. Your power is reading financial statements and not letting things go. I prefer to think of it as civic responsibility. Call it whatever you want. You saved this neighborhood a lot of grief." Well, eventually, after causing a bunch of grief first. The truth hurts sometimes. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn orange and purple. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Kids were riding bikes in the street. Somebody was grilling somewhere, the smell of charcoal and meat drifting on the breeze. It felt like a real community now, not just a collection of houses paying tribute to a petty tyrant. "Did you ever regret it?" Marcus asked. "Like when it all blew up and everything was chaos, did you wish you'd just minded your own business?" I considered the question seriously. "No, I mean, yeah, it was stressful. The investigation, the meetings, dealing with angry neighbors who thought I was causing trouble for no reason. But no, I don't regret it. People have a right to know how their money is being spent, especially when they're being forced to pay. HOAs have way too much power and not enough oversight. Somebody has to hold them accountable." "Well, I'm glad it was you and not me. I don't have the patience for that stuff." "Yes, you do. You've been a great president. You actually listen to people and try to solve problems instead of just dictating solutions." "I learned from the worst," he said with a grin. "Patty taught me exactly what not to do." The trial lasted 3 weeks. I was called as a witness and spent an afternoon on the stand explaining how I discovered the IRS revocation letter and what it meant. Patty's lawyer tried to make me seem like a troublemaker with a vendetta, but the prosecution had too much evidence for it to matter. Bank records, invoices, email correspondence, testimony from the forensic accountant. It all painted a clear picture of systematic theft over many years. Patty sat at the defense table looking small and defeated. She'd lost weight and her hair had gone gray. She looked nothing like the imperious woman who'd ruled our neighborhood with an iron fist. When the guilty verdict came in, she didn't react at all. She just stared straight ahead while her lawyer patted her shoulder. Sentencing was scheduled for January. I didn't attend, but Marcus did. He called me afterward to tell me the judge had given her the full 8 years the prosecution recommended, calling her actions a betrayal of trust that had harmed an entire community. She was remanded into custody immediately. The whole saga took 10 months from the day I sent my first records request to the day Patty was sentenced. It felt longer. I'd spent hundreds of hours on this, between reviewing documents, meeting with investigators, attending meetings, and testifying. It had consumed my life in a way I never anticipated when I first got curious about where my HOA fees were going. But it was worth it. The neighborhood was better now. The finances were clean and transparent. The board was responsive and accountable. People actually wanted to be involved instead of seeing the HOA as some mysterious entity that sent threatening letters about garbage cans. I learned a lot through the process. I learned that most people in positions of power in HOAs aren't malicious. They're just lazy or incompetent. But some people see these little kingdoms as opportunities for personal enrichment, and without oversight, they'll help themselves to whatever they can take. I learned that asking questions is often unwelcome because questions lead to accountability, and accountability is inconvenient for people doing shady things. I learned that persistence matters more than being liked, and that sometimes doing the right thing means making yourself unpopular. Most importantly, I learned that the law is there to protect homeowners from HOA abuse, but only if people are willing to use it. Florida statutes give homeowners strong rights to inspect records and challenge board decisions. The IRS has clear requirements for tax-exempt organizations. These protections only work if someone is paying attention and willing to push back when things don't add up. In February, the new board held a community appreciation cookout at the pool. It was a nice gesture, a way to celebrate getting through the crisis and moving forward. Marcus gave a short speech thanking everyone who'd stepped up during the transition. He didn't mention me by name, which I appreciated. I didn't need or want recognition. But after the speech, as people were loading up plates with burgers and hot dogs, Mrs. Chen came up to me. She was the elderly woman who'd gotten fined for having her lawn service come on a Saturday, one of the things that had first made me suspicious of Patty's motives. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "After my husband died, I had to watch every penny. Those fines were hurting me, but I didn't know what to do. I thought I just had to pay them. You stood up when the rest of us were too afraid." "You don't need to thank me, Mrs. Chen. I was just protecting my own interests," she smiled. "Maybe, but you protected mine too. And everyone else's. That matters." She patted my hand and walked away to get food. I stood there feeling unexpectedly emotional. I'd spent so much time focused on the numbers and the law and the process that I hadn't really thought about the human impact. Mrs. Chen on a fixed income being nickel and dimed by a corrupt HOA president. Families scraping together money for bogus fines while Patty used their dues to remodel her kitchen. It wasn't just about financial mismanagement. It was about people being taken advantage of by someone they were supposed to trust. That night, I went through all the documents I'd collected over the past year. I had boxes of printouts, notebooks full of handwritten notes, folders of email correspondence. It was a complete record of everything that had happened. I thought about throwing it all away, but something made me keep it. Maybe someday, it would be useful as a case study for other homeowners dealing with HOA problems. I did write up a summary of what I'd learned and posted it on a couple of online forums where people discuss HOA issues. I called it, "How I Discovered My HOA's Tax Fraud and What Happened Next." I kept it factual and didn't use real names or identifying details. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments from people sharing their own HOA horror stories, asking for advice, thanking me for sharing the information. Several people mentioned they were going to request financial records from their own HOAs after reading my post. A few weeks later, I got private messages from 3 different people saying they'd found irregularities in their HOA's finances and were pursuing investigations. I'd apparently started something bigger than just fixing my own neighborhood. Life slowly returned to normal. The legal drama faded into the background. We still had HOA meetings and occasional disputes about community issues, but they were normal disputes now. Disagreements about pool hours or landscaping choices, not corruption and embezzlement. The board functioned the way it was supposed to, with healthy debate and compromise. I paid my HOA fees every month and actually felt okay about it because I could see where the money was going. The online financial portal showed every transaction. If I had a question, I could email George the treasurer and get a response within a day or two. It was how an HOA should work. In April, I got a letter from the IRS Office of Chief Counsel. It was a formal thank you letter acknowledging my role in reporting tax violations and helping their investigation. The letter noted that my actions had helped the IRS recover over $300,000 in unpaid taxes, penalties, and interest, when you included Patty's personal tax evasion that they'd uncovered during the investigation. Apparently, she hadn't been reporting the money she'd stolen as income, which was its own separate crime. The letter also informed me that I might be eligible for a whistleblower award under Section 76(23) of the Internal Revenue Code. The IRS pays awards to people who report tax violations that result in collected proceeds. The amount can range from 15% to 30% of what's collected, depending on various factors. I'd never even thought about that possibility. I ended up receiving a check for $47,000 6 months later. It was surreal. I'd reported Patty because she was stealing and lying, not because I was expecting a reward. But the money was welcome. I used some of it to take a long vacation I'd been putting off, donated some to a local charity that helped elderly homeowners with property maintenance, and put the rest in savings. The whole experience taught me to trust my instincts. When something seems off, it probably is. When people in authority deflect questions and create obstacles to transparency, they usually have something to hide. And when you do the right thing, even if it's hard and unpopular, it tends to work out in the end. 2 years after everything went down, our neighborhood was thriving. Property values had actually gone up because potential buyers liked seeing an active, engaged community with clean finances. The pool was in great shape. The common areas looked better than ever. We'd even added some new amenities, like a playground and a dog park, funded by reserve money that actually existed now, that it wasn't being siphoned off. Patty was serving her sentence at a federal prison in Alabama. I'd heard through the neighborhood grapevine that her husband had divorced her and moved out of state. Her old house had been bought by a young family with twins who were delightful neighbors. It was like she'd never existed, except for the lessons we'd all learned about the importance of vigilance and accountability. I ran into Richard Stromberg, the HOA's former attorney, at a hardware store one day. He recognized me and came over looking slightly sheepish. "Mr. Caldwell, I owe you an apology. When you first started asking for records, I thought you were just being difficult. I didn't realize what was actually going on." "You were representing your client," I said. "I get it." Still, I should have asked more questions. Patty was very convincing. She had answers for everything and I took her at her word. I should have been more skeptical. "Lesson learned for both of us, I guess," he nodded. "The new board seems solid. I still do some work for them occasionally, and it's night and day. They actually want legal advice to do things correctly, not to figure out how to avoid accountability." We chatted for a few more minutes, then went our separate ways. It was a small moment, but it felt like closure. Even the people who'd been obstacles initially had come around to understanding why what I'd done mattered. As I drove home that day, I thought about how a simple question had changed everything. Where is my money going? It's such a basic thing to ask, but so few people bother. We pay our bills. We trust that the people in charge are handling things appropriately, and we don't dig deeper unless something forces us to. My something was a $50 fine for putting out garbage cans 15 minutes early. It was petty and stupid, but it made me mad enough to start paying attention. And once I started paying attention, the whole house of cards fell apart. I'd done a lot of research into HOA fraud after my experience, and I learned it's way more common than people realize. Thousands of HOAs across the country have similar problems. Board members taking kickbacks from contractors, treasurers embezzling funds, presidents using HOA money for personal expenses. Most of it never gets caught because nobody's looking. The sad thing is, it's not even that hard to prevent. Basic oversight, transparent accounting, regular audits, and term limits for board members would eliminate most HOA fraud. But too many neighborhoods operate on autopilot, with the same people in charge year after year, and nobody asking questions. I'd become something of a reluctant expert on the subject. I'd been asked to speak at a couple of community organization meetings about HOA oversight and homeowner rights. It wasn't something I'd ever imagined doing, but I felt obligated to share what I'd learned. If my experience could help other people avoid or address similar situations, that was worthwhile. The questions I got at these talks were always interesting. People wanted to know how to spot red flags, how to request records, what to do if their board stonewalled them, how to file complaints with regulatory agencies. I tried to give practical advice based on what had worked for me. Be polite but persistent. Document everything. Know your legal rights under state law. Follow proper procedures. Build support among other homeowners. Don't give up when you hit obstacles. One thing I always emphasized was the importance of staying calm and professional. It would have been easy to let my interactions with Patty turn into shouting matches or personal attacks. But that would have undermined my credibility and made it easier to dismiss my concerns as the ranting of an angry homeowner. By staying factual and following proper legal channels, I made it impossible to ignore what I'd found. I also stressed that most board members are good people trying to do a thankless job. Serving on an HOA board is usually volunteer work that comes with a lot of complaints and very little appreciation. The Patties of the world are the exception, not the rule. But that exception is exactly why oversight matters. My story had a happy ending, relatively speaking. Patty went to prison, the HOA got cleaned up, our neighborhood improved. But I knew not every situation worked out that way. Some HOA disputes dragged on for years in court. Some homeowners got worn down and gave up. Some communities were so dysfunctional that the only solution was to dissolve the HOA entirely, which was its own nightmare. I felt fortunate that our case had been relatively clear-cut. The evidence was solid, the authorities acted quickly, and the neighborhood came together to fix things. It could have gone very differently. On the 3rd anniversary of my original records request, Marcus threw a small party at his house. It was just a few of the neighbors who'd been most involved in the cleanup effort. We grilled steaks, drank good wine, and told war stories about the craziest moments of the whole saga. "Remember when Patty tried to say you doctored those IRS letters?" George said, laughing. "Like you'd somehow forged federal documents just to make her look bad." "Her lawyer dropped that theory pretty quick when the IRS confirmed they were real," I said. "What about when she claimed she was entitled to that management company money because she was doing extra work?" Marcus added. "The audacity of that woman." I think my favorite part was when she said the cash withdrawals were for community projects, but she couldn't provide any receipts or documentation because she'd given the money directly to contractors who preferred cash, George said. Nobody could name a single project that matched those amounts. We laughed, but there was an edge to it. The whole thing had been stressful and had damaged trust in our community. Even 3 years later, some people were still bitter about the special assessment they'd had to pay. A few families had even sold their homes and moved away, not wanting to deal with the aftermath. but most people had stayed and worked to make things better. That was the real victory, I thought. Not catching Patty or getting the IRS involved, but creating a community that was stronger and more engaged because of what we'd been through. As the evening wound down and people started heading home, Marcus pulled me aside. "I never properly thanked you, man. What you did took guts. You could have just paid your fines and kept your head down like everyone else, but you didn't, and it made all the difference." "I'm not good at keeping my head down," I admitted. "Never have been." "Well, I'm glad. This neighborhood is lucky to have you." I watched everyone leave and then walked back to my own house. The street was quiet, lit by evenly spaced streetlights that our HOA fees paid for. Lights were on in windows up and down the block. People were home, living their lives, trusting that the systems around them were working correctly. And in our neighborhood, they finally were.